Sanjeev, for taking the time out and joining us today. Please, I hand over the floor to you.
Thanks a lot, Anupama and Simriti, and all members of the panel and the audience. I apologize for not having been with you during the panel discussion. In fact, we had lots of interviews today, and I had to skip the last one and to join you. But it's a pleasure, and I would be very glad to talk about the SDGs and in particular about the role of institutions in championing, the development of Mauritius and the sustainable development in particular. Unfortunately, I haven't prepared slides for you, but I will just go over and give you facts as and when I progress in the discussion. Well, before I move to the crux of the matter, that is of the role of institutions, I'm inspired when I've seen the previous discussant about Bhutan was talking about the economy. So just to give you a bit of background of what comprises the Mauritian economy. Mauritius got its independence in 1968. It was a very low developing country with a per capita income at that time of 200 USD, and which was an agro-based economy, sugar dominated, and today it has graduated to a high income economy with a per capita income of 13,000 USD. But slightly, because of COVID, things have not been very good and rosy for Mauritius, in particular the tourism sector. So the per capita income has dropped, and we hope that things will be better in a few years to come. And we have shifted from a traditional agro-based, sugar-dominated economy into what we call a services-based economy, and with strong emphasis on the financial sector, on the tourism sector, and administration. So for us, as a small island developing economy, Mauritius, in fact, has at heart the 17 SDG goals. So, and in particular, of course, when I said 17, we have to prioritize, because it's not something that we can realize even if we have specific targets, until and unless we say what is our priorities. Just to remind you also, the Mauritian population is around 1.3 million, and we normally have 1 million tourists. So during a year, you have 2.3 million roughly people who depend on our environment, who depend on consumption, and they have to be provided with goods and services. Right. So when it comes to adherence to the Sustainable Development Goals, we can start with the role of institutions from various perspectives. It could be from academia, where I have myself been involved as a researcher, as an economist. I've been writing reports with respect to the quality of institutions in the region, in particular in sub-Saharan Africa. When we have got very good indicators now, I refer to World Bank website, where we've got work which has been done by Kaufman. You have quality, institutional quality data on rule of law, on ethno-fractionalization, voice and accountability, corruption. We've got lots of the statistics that we use whenever, as an economist, sometimes we need to find the correlation between progress in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals and the quality of institutions, because in many countries we've seen that there is an adverse relationship, right? Adverse, when I say it's that when the quality of institutions is poor or very low, then achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals is at stake. It's very difficult to sustain an economy when you have a very poor institutional quality. So it's always good, therefore, to maintain our institutions on the right track. And obviously, it's not something which is done overnight, or it might take years for us to improve our statistics, because in some countries, the statistics on let's say, on the role of institutions, they are negative. Normally, you have a range from minus 2.5 to 2.5. There is a range for this. So when you're in the negative range, it means that the institutions are suffering. There is very poor quality of institutions. If you take the negative to 0, and when it is positive and you approaches a positive figure of 2.5, which means that you have moved into the positive range, quality of institutions is getting better. So that's one general aspect we do look at as economists or social scientists, that how does a country fare in terms of its institutional quality. Now, when you look at the structure of institutions, here when I'm saying institutions, is generally you talk about the governmental organizations, consolidated government, which covers local, central, and district council, municipal council. So all these are taken into account when we are doing this kind of assessment. Now, when I look at the structure, in the case of Mauritius, fortunately, the quality of institutions is on the positive side as compared to some other sub-Saharan African or Latin American countries. So, but of course, that we need to keep track. It might drop, it might change. It's not that we are perfect as the Norwegian countries, Sweden, Finland, Norway. These are the best countries in terms of quality of institutions, but we are striving hard to improve. So in the context of Mauritius, we are highly vulnerable as a small island developing economy. Since I've seen the talk sometimes rotating around climate change is one of the several challenges that we face in Mauritius. And I would say why? Because we have cyclones as an island economy, island state. We are exposed to extreme weather events. We, according to the World Disaster report, World Disaster Report, Natural Disaster Report, Mauritius is one of the most vulnerable countries that you would see. And we tend to try to mitigate, try to adapt ourselves to climate change. It's over years, obviously, it's not now. We've been facing cyclones, extreme weather, since decades, since centuries, but we are trying to become more resilient. But in order to become resilient to these, in order to be able to achieve the sustainable development goals, we have to get our institutions right. So when I say institutions, I will talk about what can be done at the level of a country in order to improve on sustainability. Now, when you look at the 17 SDGs, it's quite scattered, right? But United Nations has further refined in terms of fewer, clubbing them into different, let's say, clusters, so that there is more follow-up in terms of accountability, in terms of the response and tracking of progress. But as it is, if you rely on the 17 goals, we need to have the indicators. It's based on the indicators that actually one will be able to really track the progress. Now, when I talk about the role of institutions, we have the government. The government itself has different layers. You can have the state government, we can have the local government, we can have, provincial government. So all these are layers that we need to study, and we don't want also a bureaucratic approach to SDGs. Why bureaucratic? Because the bureaucracy sometimes may kill the enthusiasm, may kill the whole spirit or defeat the purpose of achieving a particular goal when it comes to mobilizing resources, follow up on policies, and the implementation process. Well, sorry, just hold on 1 minute. I'll just answer someone. Sorry for this. I just got a phone call from somewhere. So what I was saying is that the kind of layers sometimes we have at the governmental level, it's like these might constitute hurdles to our progress. So these are things that we have to be very careful, because there are laws to be enacted, laws to be reviewed in order to ensure that we achieve certain targets as prioritized under the different SDG goals. Now, government layers is one aspect, but then at the same time, we need to find how does the central government objective or even the local government objectives, they are coherent with the international norms, coherent with achieving the SDG goals, because sometimes we might be having our own domestic priorities, because local government, when we talk about fiscal decentralization, they have their own peculiarities, their own problems to address, and it might not be very easy to just link up whatever we have at the local level with what the central government wants to achieve, or what maybe the United Nations want to achieve. So that is something which we have to look at, and obviously the limited resources. It could be physical, it could be financial, it could be human. Achieving the SDGs actually requires a lot of resources to be mobilized. So do we need the international community to assist us? All these requires proper planning. And that's what I said is like, it has to be at the apex itself, at the central government, spearheading not all the goals, but particular goals, because some of them do overlap. So what constitute the priorities of the central and the local government in order to make an alignment and to achieve the goals in a reasonable time frame? Now that's one, government is one. Secondly is about the private sector. When we talk about the private sector, in particular, I'm talking about the business community. So how do we get their buy-in? Because the private sector might have its own objectives, market share, profitability. Some might not be concerned, but we know that private sector is indirectly concerned in terms of the negative externality effects that they normally, impose or confront the society. So we have one way of getting them. There are tax policies, there are government policies, subsidies, etc., that have to be obviously realigned in order to get their buying, to get them committed, and to get their help in achieving the SDGs. So government alone, it might not be something which is very feasible. So that's an aspect which we have to also take on board. And thirdly, it's about the community engagement. If we want to have the trickle-down effect, whatever policies are being adopted, how do these transcend, how do these move to the community? We need to have the NGOs. So then the non-governmental organization, the civil society, is an important stakeholder that must also be on board. So I would say that it requires, therefore, lots of efforts to be done by the central government to ensure that proper trickling down to the state level governments, and to communicate at the grassroots level with the business community and with also the the civil society or people at large. So that's something which is in Mauritius. How do we do? We get these people involved. We have the NGOs. We have lots of NGOs. Obviously, for a small country, when I say lots proportionately, we will not be able to defeat India, a very large federation. But at the same time, we do have a lot of them. They do receive grants from the government, but most of them, they have their own resources from the international community, from people contributing, donors. So from there, they are moving into the different aspects. So one way of coaching them is to allow them to help the government by moving into the SDG targets. They have to help out. They can't just, the scheme is that when you look at SDG sometimes, when you look at the civil society, sometimes or NGOs, they might be having their own objectives, but now this has been rationalized. So we have got the Ministry of Social Integration and Empowerment that do liaise with them in order to make them more focused, the NGOs, and in combating, in struggling against poverty, against all those, what we call loopholes in the society, problems that are cropping up in the family, gender issues, poverty, child welfare. So all these are the role of NGOs are very important in that aspect. So the government alone may not be able to do so. Sometimes you have the business community. So how do we get the business community on board? They do pay what we call these through the corporate social responsibility. In fact, it used to be a tax of 2%, 2 to 5%. So that's like a compulsory contribution to a corporate social responsibility fund, which is managed by the government, and that is basically used in order to fight certain causes linked to the SDGs at the same time. So that's something which is again through an institutional setup, well monitored with a Ministry of Social Integration, which looks after this. We also have at the level of the Ministry of Environment, when we talk, why I'm citing this, because of the aspect, the climate change aspect, where we have the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Committee, which gets activated whenever you have extreme weather lurking around. It could be a storm surge, cyclone, floods. So they are also an active part of organ of the government, constituting, which is made of different ministries and people who have experience from the Met Office, the Defense Unit. It could be also from the health center. So all these are organs of the government which try to address extreme weather events, which is part, obviously, not all the SDGs, but one aspect which is looked at. Now, one thing that I want also to share with you is about the role of the academic community, where I'm directly concerned, probably most of you also related and research institutions. At the University of Mauritius, what we have done is we are spearheading the SDGs by having clusters. We have got different research groups which have come up. So they address the SDGs through research. With whatever research fund that we used to have, we are saying now, no, you can't just get the fund, you have to bid for it. And the bidding exercise is based on whatever SDG project they have. And we normally allocate in terms of those projects that will address the highest number of SDG overlapping, because some of the SDG targets, they overlap in between. So based on this, we allocate the funds and we encourage researchers at the university to be engaged in the activities. They produce books, publications, reports, which we share with the government and feed in terms of the policy recommendations whenever the budgets are being presented. or at the international community level. So the university also has got modules, courses, or programs of study which address SDGs specifically. Different faculties, we've got 7 faculties on campus. You might visit our website, you will see all of them. So they have that mandate to contribute towards the SDGs at the same time. And the Department of Economics also is working on the role of institutions. So that's where I've been involved. And we write reports for International Institute of Migration. Recently, I just want to share with you one aspect about institutional framework, which has to be revisited, is in the region of Africa, for instance, how do you address climate change? It's through migration. Now, migration is sometimes there are some countries like Maldives, the Tonga, not necessarily Mauritius, which may disappear in the next 50 years. So what do you do with the inhabitants? Where do you send them? So we have to have a migration plan. It could be within the country, like in Mauritius, we have the coastal region. There are many people who are exposed coastally because when they are exposed to climate extreme, let's say cyclones, soil erosion, beach erosion. So what do we do with them? We need to have a migration plan from coastal to inland because we are a small country too, 720 square miles. So that's very small, a very tiny dot in the Indian Ocean. So similarly, our countries, so we have to find a plan with the SADC region, Southern African Development Community, how to encourage mobility of people, Mauritians moving there, and they can also come, so that whenever there is disaster mitigation aspects through migration, which is an important element which we need to address, which is however not looked at because there are many laws to be amended. Some governments do not necessarily like to have refugees, climate refugees, for instance. So these are important aspects. I don't know whether my time is off or I can stop here. I don't have any more.
Yes. Thank you so much, Professor Sanjeev. That was very insightful, and thank you so much, yes, for sharing all these details about Mauritius. In fact, it's been a little difficult for us to get in touch, as I mentioned to you earlier.